Hello YouTube, I hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to take a look at Fritz Leiber's series in Lankhmar of his two major thieves that are Grey-Mouser and Fafard, and I want to take a look at another one of the short stories that he wrote in here. Today I'm taking a look at Bazaar, which was published in 1963. Now Bazaar is actually, I think, a really good example of a traditional sort of Fritz Leiber story, and it's also heavily influential on a lot of things that followed too. That's one of the reasons why I chose it. He wrote a huge number of works in the Fritz Leiber series. Many of them would actually win Hugos, Nebulas, and so forth. He actually won 6 Hugos and 3 Nebulas during his career. I think 3 or 4 World Fantasy Awards too. And he also wrote a lot of science fiction too, particularly some hard science fiction. He also writes some things in the Cthulhu mythos and some horror works too, as well as lots and lots of fantasy stuff. But his description of Lankhmar and the character of the thieves that are members of the Thieves Guild and so forth are things that I would consider to be some of the most influential in fantasy for modern sort of stories. And modern fantasy, I think, owes a lot. This sort of concept of an urban adventure in fantasy. So any of the fantasy worlds that have these giant cities in them are probably taking steps from pages out of Lankhmar, which is kind of the first place to do that. Similarly, Thieves Guilds, Thieves Rivals, and so forth. This is also a place that did that too. Also, even many of the magical items, the concepts, and so forth, and even the title of this short story itself are ones that kind of resonate still through today in modern fantasy. And Gary Gygax in Appendix N for Dungeons and Dragons talked about a lot of the influences that Dungeons and Dragons had, and that he kind of gave to the world, and it really inspired him. And Fritz Leiber's Lankhmar series with these two characters is definitely one that hit on his list. And in fact, he'll actually point it out at the end. He'll say, and these, 5 or 6, which include, this series and some other ones too, are ones that he thinks are even more sort of influential. Jack Vance is another example, and so forth, are even more, are some of the most popular and influential. And you can see that really in most of the stories that are written here. So what I want to do is take a look at and briefly review for you Bazaar, so you can get a feel for it, and so forth. And then we'll go ahead and after that talk about how I think it's been influential, how you still see some things from it through today in modern fantasy, and so forth. And then I'll leave you to it. Now, in this publication, it's 40 pages long. It's the last of the stories in this novel-sized book. I've read it 3 times now. I reread it this morning, so I'd be kind of fresh with it and so forth, so that I could talk to you guys about it, coming to it with fresh eyes and so forth. But basically, what's going to end up happening is that you're going to have 2 thieves. One thief is this giant, almost Conan-esque 7-foot barbarian from the north named Fafard. He fights with this one giant great sword called Grey Wand and so forth. He's this strong, ethical guy who, while he thinks he's ethical, he'll ultimately do things that are more that are less good in order to survive and so forth when push comes to shove. Similarly, his friend and thief Grey-Mouser, who's 5 foot tall, fights with a sword in each weapon, and so forth. One of them, Cat's Claw. And he also is a thief too. They're both members of the Thieves Guild and so forth. And he will talk about survival and doing things that are just for themselves rather than helping others out. But he'll ultimately wind up, when push comes to shove, being the more altruistic of the two, and so forth. Well, they each have. They both are in this big giant city of Lankhmar, which has millions of people in it, and so forth. And this is this giant metropolis in this world of Newan. Now. The world has written tons of stories, like I said, of these 2 characters. In some cases, he'll actually write just one of them. So he'll give like the intros for the Grey-Mouser story and who he was and his background, or he'll do the same thing with Fafard too. But again, what I want to take a look at is this story, because I've actually done one of these stories, and I actually thought about maybe moving, because right now I'm doing 2 videos a week on Sunday and Thursday, but I also thought about and I'm having a special Clark Ashton Smith theif cycle short story every Tuesday until I finish up the first book of that. And I thought about maybe having Fritz Leiber taken over with his Lankhmar series and so forth. But that would probably be like a year of Tuesdays. And doing 3 videos a week can be a little tough on the time when I have a full-time job, and I do other things too. In addition to my full-time job, I also write, have columns and so forth. So it can be a little kind of strenuous to do 3 videos a week instead of 2. I may go back to 2, just occasionally doing it like I've done so far. This is the second story that I've done. I did the first one, Two-Sided Adventure for you, and now I'm going to be doing this one. So again, let's kind of check in with Bazaar the Bazaar and what's doing. In this story, you're going to see that Grey Mouser has gone into this store that's in one of the pavilions in Lankhmar. And this store, he's been pulled in by something that caught his eye. You're going to see Fafard's going to see him go into this store. He's about ready to follow him in when he hears some voices behind him, and he turns around. And those are behind him are the two wizard patrons that he has now. Fafard has, because he's super taciturn, doesn't like talking, his patron, his wizard patron, is definitely somebody who loves to talk, and he therefore really annoys Fafard, and so forth. And the Grey Mouser's wizard patron is this person who the Grey Mouser loves to talk and is super extroverted and so forth. And of course, he has the patron that's super introverted. Well, his only, and Sheeble only uses these words, which is Grey Mouser's patron, only like dials out words occasionally, and almost like their currency, and will always try to use the fewest words possible, and then stops talking altogether, and so forth. So these two wizards are rivals, and there are actually really some fun stories in there where they'll set Grey Mouser and Fafard up against each other. In fact, one of my favorite stories is this. But in this, they're actually both there for Fafard. They've summoned Fafard and Grey Mouser to this area because there is something really dangerous that is hitting the area and so forth, and they want the two of them to go take it out. So we're going to find out what that is, and that's the Bazaar that Grey Mouser has just walked into. And basically, there are these creatures from another world that are called Devourers. And they're intelligent, but they're from another plane. And what they do is they move from plane to plane to plane, and they have this shop that shows up overnight. And then then what it does is it has these various charms and stuff for people that enter the shop, and they're selling things that are worth nothing, like that have no value at all to these people that are coming in and thinking that they are looking at some of the most highest quality stuff that's out there and so forth, and are more than willing to shelter cash, especially if they've been charmed too. So not only are they beguiled into thinking that these things that are worth nothing, like rocks, refuse, trash, and so forth, are worth something, but they're also being beguiled and charmed and to think that everybody there is their friend and is there for them and so forth. And you're seeing a number of things that are there and so forth. And so they want, but the Grey Mouser's already gone in, so now the Fafard is going to have to go in. Now the Fafard gets the 2 gifts that they intended, for one for him and one for the Grey Mouser, so he's going to go in with both of them. And one of them is a Cloak of Invisibility, and he's told up front, hey look, the Cloak of Invisibility has two issues. One, if you bleed, it'll leave a track, so don't get cut or wounded. Number 2, if you be careful of where you use it or what you're doing, because smart wizards have magic that they can cast to counter invisibility and see you through it anyway, which is, we'll talk about that later on. And then the second thing they give him is a blindfold of true seeing that's made out of a spider's web, and he can put that on and he will see things as they actually are rather than as they appear to be. So anyway, so Fafard gets these 2 items, the Cloak of Invisibility and the blinds. I'm sorry, I was almost sneezed for a moment there, and now I've recovered. And anyway, the blindfold of true seeing. He's going to go and penetrate the Bazaar, which our good friend Grey Mouser has just gone into in order to bring him back out. Now he arrives and so forth. He's going to see things as they are. There is this. He sees the trash, the refuse, the offal, and so forth that they're selling as actual stuff and so forth, and all the money that they're getting, all the enthralled people that are there. The big giant crows, the people that are no longer acting like they would normally act and so forth. And he sees the Grey Mouser doing the same thing, giving up money and so forth. And so he's there. He also sees things as they truly are with the blindfold as well as the Cloak of Invisibility. He penetrates the shop. There's some traps and stuff in the shop too. There are some animated skeletons that will attack him. He also has to deal with this animated living statue made out of iron that will attack him too, and his weapons aren't going to work against him and so forth. So basically what he's going to try to do is try to get out of the shop with Grey Mouser and get out of the Bazaar and so forth. Now I'm going to stop there with my overall sort of overview, because that's about halfway through the story, and I want to give you a chance to finish it up. But again, it was 40 pages here. I read it this morning. Now, because I've already read it twice, it took me like 40 minutes, and so forth. There are, now Fritz Leiber, whenever he writes something, he has this dark humor about it, and this story has that too. For example, after Fafard arrives in the shop and starts telling Grey Mouser things to leave and so forth, the Grey Mouser is totally thinks that he's enthralled and so forth. He's going to be saying things and doing things that are they're very out of character and actually very funny, and so forth. And so that's he has this sort of humor in his writing, situational humor. He doesn't write jokes, but he writes these sort of situational humors that's actually downright funny at times. And there are definitely some moments in here that are really humorous, particularly about 40% to halfway through the story and so forth. But it is a good 40 pages. There's a lot of world building that's going to happen. You're also going to see the shop from Grey Mouser's viewpoint and Fafard's viewpoint too, and that world building that Leiber does take some time. He's going to spend at least 5 or 6 pages describing the shop from Grey Mouser's point of view, and then describing the shop and the bazaar from Fafard's point of view too. And so you're going to get a chance to see that, and see that these devourers that have come from another world to take advantage of all the various Lankhmarians to get their money, bring them in, and so and then they'll move from world to world to world, leaving behind a bunch of idiot slaves that they don't care about and so forth. So you'll see all that stuff happening through these 2 items, and he'll sneak in. They'll fight the statue that animates to attack, all that stuff. And so anyway, I'll leave that to you. Now I want to talk about how this story, as an example of this series of Fritz Leiber, of how, and not just it's a good story, it's well written, it's well crafted, it does something good, but it's also, I think, a good example again of how Fritz Leiber has influenced modern fantasy. For example, Dungeons & Dragons literally has 2 items. A cloak of invisibility that works exactly as the cloak of invisibility is described in the story, and a blindfold of true seeing, which works exactly how it's described in the story. In fact, you even have spells on true seeing and other items like gems of seeing and so forth that'll do the same thing. So this idea of true sight as a spell, or true seeing as a spell that will actually do the exactly thing as it's described here and show you how things actually are, is clearly coming straight from this story. You even have a column in the Dragon magazine that's titled "Bazaar of the Bazaar," just like this story's title is. I mean, it's just the notes in it. You even have a detect invisible spell that will detect invisibility in addition to the invisibility spells. And that will let you detect them, which is exactly what they talk about. They say, hey, look, watch out, because if you're not careful, a sorcerer, a high power wizard and so forth can cast magic that will counteract your invisibility spell. So they are told about that right up front. That's one of the weaknesses. Don't rely on it too much and so forth, right? And so again, this idea of a detect invisible spell and so forth is something that's going to be in in Dungeons and Dragons. And so there's a lot of this and you even see it in some of the world building. For example, when Grey Mouser is in the store, in the first few pages, he's looking at all these tomes, these grimoires and so forth that he thinks are high quality things and so forth. And they talk about how to fight lamias and dryads and so forth, and the list of the creatures in there literally reads like a list of creatures from the monster manual that would come later and so forth. So there's so many of these world building things that Leiber gives us in his world that Gygax will definitely bring into Dungeons and Dragons, and through many other modern places too. Lamias are a big part of modern sort of fantasy. Dryads are a big part of modern fantasy and so forth, and you can look through them and you'll kind of see a lot of this sort of detect invisibility and invisibility stuff. Cloaks of invisibility, and that means not just because of Hogwarts and the Harry Potter universe either, but also because of other things too. And similarly, you're having the concept of magical items with true seeing and so forth is still something that you're seeing. Detect magic stuff is still things that you're seeing in modern tellings, video games, board games, RPGs, and so forth, movies, and you're seeing it in lots of these different media, comics and so forth too. So this idea from Leiber is something that's resonated through modern fantasy, and this is not just Bazaar of the Bazaar. As you start to encounter the entire series, you're going to see things in pretty much all these short stories that have been incorporated, either in small or in large parts, Sometimes there are these small little hints like these magical items, but also the big stuff, thieves guilds, thieves camps, big giant cities, and so forth. Every fantasy world has to have a thieves guild, right? I mean, it's just pure Fritz Leiber. He created that. The idea of thieves camps, that only thieves will understand, a place for thieves to train, to sell their stuff, and so forth, to get quests, to go and burgle somebody else. I mean, this is straight from Leiber, right? In this world where he has two thieves as his sort of protagonists. So you get that idea. So Leiber definitely will leave you with a lot of these, in addition to having a fun story, will also leave you with a lot of these sort of influences too that you can kind of see in modern fantasy. So it's fun to kind of go back and read specifically this series. And so again, this is the second video I've shown you. The first one was the Two-Sided Adventure, which was the first one in the series, and so forth. But there's Bazaar of the Bazaar for you. Now, have you read it or anything else in this kind of series by Leiber, the Lankhmar series with Grey Mouser and Fafard? I'd be happy to talk with you about them more and engage you with that in the comments below, specifically this story or the others. Is there anything in there in my video that you disagree with? I'm also happy to talk to you about that too. You know, happy to engage with you that in the comments below too, and have that sort of conversation with you. And also, hey, if you watched this video and enjoyed it, there's no reason not to hit that subscribe button. I like to bring to you a lot of these sort of classics that are forgotten or just not read from fantasy, science fiction, and horror. This is a good example of the fantasy side of things. And Fritz Leiber is a writer who's written all three genres at various times. He's actually won awards for all three genres too. You know, he's in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, you know, and so forth. So anyway, this is Leiber for you. And then and so, you know, feel free to hit the subscribe button. There's going to be so many more of these sorts of works to follow where I review these sorts of things. And finally, hey, I want to thank you so much for your time just watching this video and investing in it. You spent this time with the entire video, and I really do appreciate it because we all have such busy days and busy lives and so many things in our lives that we have. So if you're spending that time with me, that's really humbling, and I appreciate that. So thanks again.